Welcome to another episode of the All Pop No Culture podcast. I'm your host this week, Kevin. I'm all alone again this week, so it's a short one, but I do talk about a few things that I've been watching. I started watching the most recent season of Superman and Lois after dragging on that. That's been pretty solid. I watched a film called The Deep House, which is a horror flick on Amazon Prime right now. And then I also watched The Class of '09, which is a brand new series dropping on FX and Hulu this week. In the second half of the episode, rather than review a TV show, I actually dig into what's going on with the Writers Strike, a little history of the Writers Strikes back in 2007, and then the current Writers Strike and what that means to the industry as it is right now. So it's something new. I hope that you find it interesting. I don't know that we'll do it again or do it too often. It was interesting enough for me to want to sit down and talk about the things that are going on. So I hope you enjoy that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. All right, well, I'm all alone this week again. Everybody's got stuff going on, so I'm just going to try and throw down a quick episode here and see what comes of it. I'm not sure if I have enough content to talk about, but we'll see what comes up. It's been a bit of a slow watch week for me after Guardians. There just hasn't been a whole lot on the agenda that was new this week. I threw down Superman and Lois, so I went back and started watching that again, most recent season. And I've got to say, it really reminds me of what I like about it. It's kind of disappointing to see that there's a possibility that it'll get canceled this season, or this will be the last season. There's some rumors right now that if it does get canceled, it might get picked up by HBO Max. I'm not sure what the odds of that are, considering when Gunn's Superman movie is going to come out. So we'll see on that. But with that cancellation looming aside, it's been a pretty solid season. They had to replace the young Jonathan Kent before the season started. And the new kid is doing a good job. He's new. He doesn't feel like too much of a different take on the character, but I do miss the original actor. I thought he was pretty solid. But the new kid's pretty interesting so far. I think it's not too much of a distraction once the season gets going, although there's a few directions that the character's going in that I'm not sure if they're related to the new actor or if it's just whether you're going to go with him. But it's solid so far. One of the major plot points this season is that Lois has cancer, and it's been a really interesting storyline because it's the one thing that the Superman can't beat. It's not a villain. It's not something he can go out and fight. He just has to sit back and watch her be sick and do everything he can to support her, which is interesting because he struggles with that at least a little bit, and he struggles with his own vulnerability because it's something he can't fight. I think it's a great season acting-wise by Elizabeth Tulloch. She is a fantastic Lois Lane. She's my favorite Lois Lane since Erica Durant's back on Smallville, who I thought played a great young Lois. They're very different, the two of them. This Lois is definitely like super mature and grown up. Lois Lane on Smallville was, fighting to find her place in the world. She wasn't the hard-nosed reporter that, that she's going to grow up to be. She was young and sassy and all that stuff that made Lois Lane cool. And I think Elizabeth Tulloch's Lois Lane's now the grown-up, smart, strong woman that Lois Lane should be. So I think they're both great takes on the character. You could potentially see them both character-wise going from Smallville to Superman and Lois, and it works. I think they're really good. But yeah, overall, I'm about halfway through the season, I think, or pretty close to that. I think I'm a couple episodes behind, but it's been, like I said, it's been really solid. I think the storylines with Lana Lang's side of the family aren't quite as strong as the stuff that's going on with the Kents. I think the Kents have some really cool stuff going on, and I think the John Henry Irons character's story is going really well. I'm not sure. I'm not sold on the villain yet, although I have read or seen that I think they're going to introduce Lex Luthor this year. And Lex Luthor is going to be played by Michael Cudlitz of Walking Dead and Southland fame. There's some screenshots of him right now coming out of prison or in his prison uniform, and he's bald-headed, which obviously works well for Lex Luthor. He's got a big bushy mustache and beard. I'm not sure if that is going to be the final look for him, but he's a really strong actor, so it definitely makes me really interested to see where his Lex fits in against this really grown up, mature Superman, which is kind of unlike anything we've seen on TV so far. All in all, I'd say the season's really good. I'd say go ahead and give it a shot, especially if you've been watching and maybe forgot to get back into it or whatever. Definitely do, because it's more of what made the show really good. If you've never watched Superman and Lois, I would recommend it to anybody. I think it's just a really good family story. I think Tyler Hoechlin is the best Superman that we've seen since probably, well, since Smallville. I think Christopher Reeve Superman obviously is the gold standard, but Tyler Hoechlin, when he's playing the character, is very family oriented. You've seen a guy that's been doing this for 20 plus years now. He's finally got a family and he has to prioritize that. He does put, saving the day in front of his family a lot of times, and that's a story point that they deal with a lot. How he's got to save the day instead of being there for every little thing that his family's doing, but it's also he's trying to be a family man. Like I said, his Lois has cancer, so he's trying to be there for that and help her through that. And all in all, he's just got to. He's a family man, and so it's just like anybody else that's got a job. His job just happens to be saving the world, and so he's trying to juggle those things. But yeah, I'd say especially if you haven't seen it, give it a watch. Just if you're a Superman fan, I think you'll get a lot out of it. It's really solid. So I think I've talked before about how I have a group of friends that do a movie night, a horror movie night once a week. And this week we watched a film called The Deep House. And it was actually really interesting. It's sort of a found footage format movie, but not entirely. Basically, what it is there's a couple and they travel around and they tour places that they think are haunted, and they usually have body cams on and but they can see each other, so you at least get those two angles. And for the times that they're not specifically in a home, we get the third person camera view, seeing them walk around and meet people and from behind and things like that. So it's not entirely found footage, but like I said, when they're in a location, we see them recording. So the main plot of this movie is that they find out that there is a lake. I think they're in Europe somewhere. They find out there's this house at the bottom of the lake that's supposed to be relatively untouched and easy to get to, but they don't know exactly where it is, and they're not having a lot of luck. And so they bump into this guy Pierre, who says he knows where it is, and he'll take them there. So they head out and they find out where the house is, and they dive down into this house that's underwater. And it turns out as they get in there, they find out that the house is in great condition. It's a horror movie, so I don't want to give anything away, but strangeness ensues and it gets really crazy. But I think what makes this movie an actually pretty decent horror film is that it's all about atmosphere. So when they're underwater, the house itself has no lights. So there's the two of them, and they have a little drone underwater camera that he can control and is recording stuff. And it really is about atmosphere. It uses music relatively well. It uses not just the jump scares, but just the tension of being underwater in a relatively confined space and not having control of your surroundings. I think it uses that really well to drive home like the creepiness of it. And then when things start to go sideways, you feel trapped with them in that first person camera feel. One thing that works really well too is that the drone has a red light. So there's a lot of scenes that have this creepy, like HAL from 2001 look to them. So it's good. It's really solid. The actors I've never heard of, and that's fine because they're underwater, because they're swimming around so much, and they have to be in here the whole time. They're in scuba gear and under a tank. One thing that I thought was really interesting about it is that most of this film would have had to been done through ADR. And the fear behind The Last of Us when they were making that was they didn't want to have Joel and Ellie in masks all the time, because in the game, the cordyceps virus is transferred through the air. So it was easily transmittable. You had to put on a mask anytime you saw spores around. They cut that out for both reasons of realism. They thought that if it was spores were around, they would spread too easily and spores would be everywhere, and then that would kind of defeat the whole purpose of the story. It didn't play as well in real life as it does, in a video game where things don't have to be quite as realistic. But the other thing that really concerned them was having to have masks on Joel and Ellie all the time, and how that would affect their performances and how that would affect their acting and doing the ADR work. When you look at something like a horror movie where you don't know the actors, the expressions on their faces don't matter as much as the way they react to the situations and the inflections in their voice and things like that. So it works here pretty well. So I would say to go give The Deep House a shot. Like I said, I enjoyed it. It was better than some of the B movies that we watch. We had a lot of fun watching it, kind of giggling at the stuff that doesn't work. But the guy's a kind of a shitty boyfriend. The girl is terrified through most of the things. She's the one that you're kind of rooting for the whole time. She's your final girl. But it's good. It works. Give it a shot. It was entertaining. Not an A-level horror movie, but not terrible either. And then the last thing I watched this week, really, that was new, besides all the stuff that I've been watching. So, I've been watching The Last Thing He Told Me, Silo, Rabbit Hole, Yellow Jackets, and I think something else. But all the shows that I've been watching that I've talked about the last couple of weeks are honestly moving just about the same pace. Like if I've liked all of them, they're all doing really well. Love and Death is the other one. They're all doing really well. They're all moving at a really cool pace. Love and Death has moved into the trial phase of the story, so that's kind of interesting to see what's going on with her and how she gets herself into more trouble. The Last Thing He Told Me is actually getting interesting. Finally, like it's been inching forward, and we're finally at a point now where things are finally starting to unravel. We're getting the answers to the mysteries that we weren't getting. So I think that's super helpful. And it really drives the story. We're moving into territory we haven't been in, and we get our first real past flashback from Nikolai Coster-Waldau's character, which makes that really cool. And so, if you listen to my recommendations on those shows before, or you've heard me talk about those shows before, really my opinion hasn't really changed on them. I think actually all of those shows are really good and worth a watch. But the last new thing that I watched this week is The Class of '09 back here. It's an FX show. I've been catching it on Hulu. It's an interesting story. So it takes place in 3 disparate timelines, and that's why this picture behind me looks the way that it does. You can see that there's kind of three takes on every character, right? And it takes place in '09. So when they're in the academy and doing their first year of training, then it takes place in 2023, which is, the middle row here. That is the current, that they've been in the agency for a while. They've been put through their paces. They know their jobs and where they've been assigned and things like that. And then we have the future, which is around 2034, I think it is. And so these characters, we see them grow up. The idea is that when they're setting up this class of '09, this first class, and before I say too much, I've only watched, I think, the first episode so far and part of the second one, so I don't have a bunch of insight into it. But there's definitely Kate Mara here is kind of the main character. and she's at some point had a relationship with this dude over here, who was in Sense8 back when that was on Netflix, and he's pretty solid. Like I like him a lot. I don't. I feel like I've definitely seen this girl before, but I don't recognize her very well. But she's solid. She's kind of a meek but very smart character. And then we have Brian Tyree Henry, who was in Eternals, and he's really good. Like he's a really strong actor. I like him a lot. And so the gist of it is that by the time the future rolls around, by the time 2034 rolls around, it's almost like Minority Report. Like the FBI is working with an AI that's determining, who commits crimes or who's going to commit a crime and things like that. And so one of the tension points in 2034 is they really are at that Minority Report point where they're starting to arrest people based on what the AI thinks they're going to do. They haven't done anything. There's no evidence of a crime yet, but they're being arrested because they will potentially commit a crime. And that's as you can imagine, is not a great thing to be doing for as far as human rights goes and things like that. And the two agents that are out to look into that and work on that are Kate Mara. She's she, like I said, she's the main character across all timelines. She's really the one we're following, even though other things seem to, or other actors seem to be important, and we definitely jump into their lives and see the things that are going on. But Kate Mara's our driving force. And then, funny enough, the main male character from Mrs. Davis that I've been watching over on Peacock is in this. And I love that guy. He was on Limitless back when that was a series that was canceled too early, and he was great in that. So there's a lot of things that I like about the show. The intrigue is interesting. It's the three timelines is really cool because you're seeing these people as what amounts to babies in the field and professionals, and then dealing with the craziness that the future holds. So I can't speak to how good it's going to be, but at least so far it's interesting. There's definitely a mystery to it as to why things are going the way they are. Brian Tyree Henry's character is actually the head of the FBI by the time 2034 comes around. So, because he's using that AI, he seems to operate, at least in these early episodes, as a bit of the show's villain. The AI, unlike Mrs. Davis, where the AI is sentient and is, literally talking to her and giving her attitude and things like that. The AI in this is not a character yet. It's just serving a purpose and doing a job. So I don't know that it's going to have a personality later or not. That'll be interesting to see, but it's a solid show so far. So I would say give it a shot and see if you're into it. It does feel like it's going to have a bit of a mystery. I think it's smarter than something like Quantico, which was only okay, although in the early parts of the first season, that one was pretty solid too. So we'll see how this goes, but because it's an FX show, I think it's going to stick to being a little grittier. They don't mind throwing around some foul language, so it's definitely more of an adult show in that regard. But I would say to give it a shot. Again, it's on FX or Hulu, and it's been good. It's been good. I've enjoyed it so far, and the acting's top notch. Like I love all the actors in this, so it's got a lot of potential. The last thing that I wanted to do to try and fill some time here is talk about something that isn't something that I've been watching or anything anybody's watching. So it's definitely a different sort of thing for the show. But I want to talk about the writers' strike that's going on right now, and the effect that that's going to have on the film and TV industry. The last time we had a writer's strike was way back at the end of 2007, and in that writer's strike lasted 100 days, so over 3 months. So just to kind of use that as a bar and what was going on at the time, estimates put this at costing the industry about $2 billion, which is no small amount of money. Although these days $2 billion, well, a lot, if you have a blockbuster summer that was, Endgame and Avatar, and you're good. I don't know if there's anything this year coming out that's gonna do the same thing, but what you'll see during this strike is that for the moment, things aren't really affected. Most TV shows are in the can, so they don't need writers for those. What tends to happen when a writer's strike is imminent, and what happened in 2007, that definitely had its impact on the industry, is that will start to rush films and pump through them as fast as they can to get them to the point where they can be filming them. So if the writer's strike happens, they're ready to go. But not having writers there once you start filming definitely has its downsides. So the films that were the most impacted in 2007, most obviously impacted in 2007, were things like G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, X-Men Origins Wolverine, Transformers Rise of the Beast, and one of the ones that was really bad or took a really big hit was the James Bond film Quantum of Solace. They rushed it with a script that wasn't completed or wasn't, it only been through like a single round of edits. They've documented that along the way, Daniel Craig had to do a bunch of his own writing in his trailer, and he self admits that he's really not very good at that. So if you look at the reviews for Quantum of Solace, it took a huge hit. Like none of those films did well at all, and they potentially could have been better. The Rise of the Beast script was thrown together from an outline that Michael Bay did, and he's not a writer by any stretch of the imagination. So, and that movie was a huge backslide from what came before it, and then led us into this, spiral of Transformers films that have been pretty terrible. So it's really interesting to see how that stuff affected the film industry. In TV, we saw a lot of, things take a hit. The biggest one, the one that everybody points to in 2007, is Heroes. We had seen a great first season of Heroes. If you watched that when it came out, everybody loved the first season of Heroes. It looked like a show that had so much potential. And then the writer's strike happened, and it just fell apart after that. Like, I don't know if the writers, they didn't get the same writers back, or if they tried to, work off some weaker scripts or something like that. But the show just fell apart after the first season, and that's when the writer's strike happened. So that's one of the ones that people really document as being hit by that. There was another show, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which was really cool. That was starring Lena Headey of Game of Thrones fame, but she played Sarah Connor, and her son was still alive. And that one was supposed to pick up right after or shortly after Terminator 2. And then Summer Glau was the Terminator coming for them or working with them. And it was actually doing really great. But because of the writer's strike, it had to take a break. And by the time it came back, it lost 50% of its ratings, and then ultimately, died after the second season. And so that was a major bummer. That show was actually really pretty solid and interesting and fun. And so 2007 was rough in that regard. There's one of the other things that's really interesting is that we missed out on what was potentially the creation of the DCEU before Zack Snyder got in. Director George Miller was going to start that with a new Justice League. I think it was called Justice League Mortal. And that was actually in production. It was going, but because the script could never be finished, that created a bunch of setbacks, and then the film was ultimately scrapped, and they didn't ever get to kick that one off. I'm not too clear on the plot for that one, but the cast was really interesting. You had Armie Hammer was going to be Batman, DJ Cotrono, who I've never heard of, was going to be Superman, Adam Brody was going to be the Flash, Jay Baruchel was going to be Maxwell Lord, Common was going to be John Stewart and Green Lantern, which actually would have been kind of cool. I dig Common right now. And Anton Yelkin was going to be the Flash. He passed away way too young in a car accident in his own driveway, which is crazy. But it's an interesting cast, and I actually really like Anton Yelchin. I would have loved to see him as the Flash. Um, but that's something we never got. If you look it up on the web, there definitely is a breakdown of the whole film. So if you're curious about it and you want to see where they were going to go with it, you can definitely look it up. It may, who knows what it could have been. You can read a script, or not a script, but a plot outline, and see what could have been. But with the actors and the director and all that stuff, you never know quite what would have turned out. Another interesting one, not everything to come out of the 2007 writer strike was bad, because writers couldn't go to producers, couldn't give them their scripts, because the strike was all about them getting paid. They couldn't make money off their scripts at the time. Neil Patrick Harris threw together the Dr. Horrible sing-along blog, which is a lot of fun. It's him, Nathan Fillion, and Felicia Day, who I absolutely adore. She's great. But that one's a lot of fun. It was, because they couldn't use production companies, it's one of the first like real things that was produced and put on YouTube. And it's just fun. It's about a supervillain, Dr. Horrible, and he's in love with a girl that doesn't know. And then he's dealing with a superhero who's actually a total dick, played by Nathan Fillion, which is hilarious. And but it's a lot of fun. If you haven't seen it before, definitely go find it. The music is really catchy. It's a musical. It's 3 acts, about 15 minutes long, so it's not super. It won't take you much time to watch it. You can watch it in 3 sets, and it's super entertaining. Another thing that is credited to the writer's strike, although there's some debate about it out there whether it's true or not, is that Breaking Bad, the last 2 seasons, or sorry, the last 2 episodes of the first season had to be put on hold. So they had done most of the show, and then because of the writer's strike, they didn't get to finish it. And during that time, Vince Gilligan saw that Jesse Pinkman was much better of a character than he expected him to be. The Jesse Pinkman was supposed to die at the end of the first season. And so the story goes that after having time to, reflect on these first few episodes, they decided to keep Jesse Pinkman around. I've also seen that either the same thing happened with Hank, Walter's brother-in-law, or that it just in fact was Hank instead of Jesse Pinkman that they wanted to keep around. So there's a little debate about that, but either way, the fate of those characters was changed because the writers had time to look into, or the writers had time to come to terms with who these characters were and what their potential was with regards to the show. So that was another little interesting bit. And then the last thing that the last couple of things that were really interesting about the 2007 strike was, there was a channel back in the day called the Learning Channel, and the Learning Channel had a bunch of educational stuff. It started in 1993. It had, shows involving Walter Cronkite. It was all about education. And then when the 2007 strike hit and you had no writers, the big boom that came out of that during that lack of production and things that having to get going was unscripted television or reality TV. And that became huge. And the Learning Channel didn't become at that point, but ultimately became TLC instead of the Learning Channel. And they started throwing together a bunch of garbage television. So you got Toddlers and Tiaras, Cake Boss, which isn't garbage television. It's at least decent. It was fun to watch for all the cakes and stuff, but it was all about the drama behind the scenes. You had I Didn't Know I Was Pregnant, 19 Kids and Counting, The Little Couple, and then kind of a spinoff of Cops, which is called The Police Women of Broward County. So there's a bunch of reality TV coming out. And then there was one that ultimately kind of changed the last 6-8 years of this country, which was Celebrity Apprentice. The Apprentice had been on for a while, and Donald Trump was doing that, and it was doing okay, and whatever. But when the Celebrity Apprentice came out, that's when Donald Trump got his airtime, and that's when he started running things, and that's when his stock blew up. I think his fame from that is what led him to be able to run for president and ultimately win. And it's interesting to think if there hadn't been a writer's strike, Celebrity Apprentice wouldn't have been made because they weren't struggling to find the television. They would have had the regular Apprentice and done that, and that was doing okay, but that actually blew up a lot after Celebrity Apprentice. And so it's just interesting. It's really interesting to think how something as um, unrelated to the presidency as a writer's strike in Hollywood would have such a drastic impact um, on the future of the entire country. So that is all the 2007 writer's strike. We are now sitting here in 2023, and we have another writer's strike. And it's been going on for a couple of weeks now, and we're already seeing things be completely shut down. The shows that have been halted are, there's a lot of stuff going on. SNL was basically put to bed, so that's not in production right now. Fallon, Colbert, Seth Meyers, those are all currently out of production. Axe, Stranger Things, Severance, all great shows have come to a halt in their production. Stranger Things probably, and maybe probably Severance too, are the two biggest ones. Like everybody's waiting for the end of Stranger Things, which has taken them so long to produce this season for, and all of a sudden we don't, they're not working on it. So who knows what that does to the end of Stranger Things? The nice thing about that one is they're ultimately going to have the same writers and directors and producers and everything when it comes out of the writer strike. So that one probably won't be affected quality wise, but it will be affected time wise. Another show that is affected by it a little bit is The Last of Us season 2, which is based on The Last of Us Part 2, the game. They're not even casting anymore. They were going to have, once the strike hit, they couldn't use any new material written by the writers for the show. So they were potentially going to use scripts from the game and have people audition with that. And then they decided that they wanted to stick with, the strike and be and back the strike. So they ultimately decided not to do that. And so that is in a holding pattern right now too on the casting side. So, it definitely there's a lot of things affected currently. If you look at the MCU, most of the shows and movies and stuff that were going to be coming out this year are fine. The Secret Invasion comes out this in a couple months, and that one's fine. The Marvels is already in post production, so those things are all good. One that keeps getting hit with delays, and this is just another one because they were in rewrites, is Blade, which I'm dying to see come out. I think Mahershala Ali is awesome, and I think he'd be a great Blade if they can ever just get the damn thing off the ground. But now now like I said, they went back to rewrite the thing because they weren't happy with it, and now they're in a holding pattern because of the writer strike. So that's another thing getting hit. But if you look at the reason behind the writer strike, so when you think about a union and people going to strike, sometimes it feels like one side or the other is being super picky. But it was really interesting here in that when the Writers Guild of America, the WGA, went out and said, hey, they were negotiating with the producers for the new agreement. They had their asks and they put them out there, and the producers came back and replied once with a list of things. It was a lot lower than what they were asking for, and then when the WGA came back with their what they wanted, the producers just simply didn't reply before the deadline. I don't know what their end game was, but they ultimately decided to strike. And so being someone that is interested in writing someday, or writing for the stuff for television and movies, I obviously I'm going to lean on the side of the writers. I think anything that happens in the Writers Guild, anything they do, is potentially if I can ever make it, which, the odds are slim, but, if I ever write something that gets produced, or I ever make it into a writer's room, or I ever make it to having a film produced, the things that they're fighting for means they're fighting for my future. So I definitely have an interest in what's going on there. And I know some writers from the writers groups that I've been in, things like that, that are out there actively picketing, and some of them have been affected um, by this personally, whether it's financially or people trying to make their break right now that have stuff out there that they're working on. The advantage for a lot of us that are amateurs that aren't yet necessarily in the WGA yet, or haven't produced anything, is that we can, independently work on stuff. One of the folks from my writers group did a table read with a bunch of actors and stuff, and that's okay as long as it's not produced by a production company, as long as they're not spending that money. So that has been, it's been nice to see people have an opportunity. There's nothing that's stopping anyone from writing, but at the same time, if you cross that line, if you try and become somebody that's writing and producing, the WGA, just like any union, they're going to see you as a scab. They're going to look at you, and then down the line, when you want to join the WGA, they're not going to let you. So the advantages that you get from that, so you wouldn't get. So, the anybody trying to make it right now that's smart, is sticking with the rules and following behind these. A lot of the people that I follow are part of the picketing lines in front of, Paramount and Netflix and all these places that are in the producers union. One of the biggest things, what the key thing that it really all comes down to is, it's all about compensation. From what I've been reading, the weekly writer and producer pay has dropped almost 25% over the last decade, and when you account for inflation, and that sucks. Like, these people are working harder, they're working in smaller rooms, they're working their tails off to get this work done, and to see their pay come down is really unfortunate. I think this one of the things that has changed the way things work is the streaming industry. It used to be that people were in a writer's room for, 6 months, 8 months, a year, working really hard. And now the streaming services have them cranking stuff out in, weeks and months instead of months and a year. So you get paid by how long you're in the room. So if they can get you in and out of the room faster, they're paying you less. And then you have to try and line up your next gig so that you're still working, because you only get paid for the work you do. And so people are trying to have to work on multiple shows and not get the consistent money that they're getting before from working for an extended period of time. And it's not easy to just jump into another one. You've got to go through, the vetting process and all the things that they do to decide that you're going to be a writer on, show X after you just did show Y. So it's really hard for people. And then folks that have been working for a long time, now that streaming is coming in, the other issue that they're really having is they're trying to fight for a more standardized pay structure, because the residuals that people are getting from the streaming services are terrible. There's a quote from a woman, Valentina Garza, who's a producer and writer on Wednesday. She was a writer producer on Only Murders in the Building. She did Jane the Virgin back in the day. But she says, in case anyone's wondering why the WGA is on strike, this is my streaming residual check for 2 episodes of Jane the Virgin. And she tweeted a picture of it, and it was a check made out for 3 cents, 1 cent, and 2 cents. So basically 6 cents of streaming residuals isn't an income. It's nothing that you can, obviously, you can't even use that to buy a pack of gum. And so working all that time they did on these shows, writers and directors have always lived off the residuals that were made from their shows, that not hugely, like, that wasn't their primary source of income. Their primary source of income is the work, but residuals helped keep you afloat, or helped you work through some of those other times. And that's not there, obviously, anymore. So the union is really looking the number one thing that they really want is regulations around AI, because as we've seen in the last few months, things like Chat GPT are coming out, and and AI is really there's scripts being written by AI, and to a degree, some of them aren't even terrible. But what you do lose is the humanity of those things, the emotion of those things. But there's a lot of studios right now that are talking about starting a script with artificial intelligence and then having, a human writing crew come in and clean it up and be done with it, which means even less time for the writers in the writers' room. So, the WGA wants to regulate that and say, what a film company or a production company can do with regards to AI and how much of that could be done with AI. The other thing that's a big deal is the pay structures. If residuals are going to effectively go away, then they should be paid more upfront. They should be paid something closer to a salary rather than, an hourly or a weekly pay that they'd been getting when residuals were a thing. Um, when the Writers Guild put out their initial proposal, it would have cost, what they were asking for across the industry. So not just one single studio, not just one single thing. They were asking for about $430 million per year to, put money back into the pockets of the people that are working. And the counter proposal that ultimately led to the strike was $86 million. So not even a quarter of, or right around a quarter of what they were actually asking for, which is just terrible. It's just not, it's not feasible. And when you look at how much money was lost in 2007, when you say they lost $2 billion in the few months that the strike was going on, $420 million is just a fraction of that. It's really not very much of that $2 billion hit at all. And, and seeing the blockbusters that have come out since 2007, the movies that have, how many films have hit $1 billion since 2007? You got films like Toy Story, Zootopia, Toy Story 4. The first one was Toy Story 3, Toy Story 4, Top Gun Maverick. These are all films that have made over $1 billion, and they've all been since 2007. Nearly every $1 billion film, besides the original Avatar, has come after 2007. So, this money that they're complaining about, this $420 million that the studios are balking at, they're making a lot of money off of these writers. There's a lot of actors when you go out to the picket lines, when you watch the picket lines, the actors are out there with the writers. The big name actors, guys like Mandy Patinkin, other actors out there have come out and literally said, they're like, we don't have a movie, we don't have a story without the writers. So if you don't pay the writers, you don't have films. You're not gonna, the actors aren't out there making it up as they go. And when they do, you get something like Quantum of Solace, which, did not work, which was a pretty terrible film. So, ultimately, I don't have a lot more to say on it, but as you can see, like, we're heading towards a shift if we don't get this right. We're going to have, the scary thing is, like, we potentially really could have AI written films that will lack the heart that the films of today currently have, the things that are brilliantly written by people that understand emotion, that understand those interpersonal relationships and the way that they should be. And if we drive the writers and producers out of the industry, it's gonna really suck. I think, your late night talk shows are going to go away because they won't have their writers. In 2007, Conan O'Brien went back on the air after the writer's strike, but he did it without writers, and he did a bunch of sketches about, with just dumb content to point out the fact that without his writers, he didn't have the content that he needed. And so it's a big deal. I think if we don't, I say we, if the producers don't fix this, if they don't get this working and get this figured out, We're in for another Heroes. I don't think necessarily shows like Severance or Stranger Things or even Hacks are necessarily the ones in danger for that. But take a show like The Class of '09 that's just getting going, has a lot of potential, looks like it could be really good. If it gets hit with a writer's strike, something could go really sideways for it and just crater it before it gets the chance to be what it's supposed to be. I look at um, something like Lost back in the day when that got hit, they had to cut 2 episodes out of the season that was airing, and that season ended up only being 16 episodes, I think. When most seasons were 20 plus, and that's right around the time the show was doing its worst. Was the writer's strike. It hit them pretty hard, and that's a show that is, for me, it's my favorite show, but it's still one of the better shows that was made, especially around that era. And to see how it was affected by the writer's strike and how it just had to struggle to come back and get its finish, it's really tough. So I think if hopefully this writer's strike doesn't go on too long. I hope that the writers get what they deserve for now. And yes, like I said, some of it's greed. I want to be writing and making TV and making movies one day. And if I don't, I want to see the people that are doing it get rewarded for the work they're doing. And if I do make it someday, I hope this lays the groundwork for me to have some success and be able to survive doing this stuff. So if you're a writer or you have the opportunity to support the writers, do so. And it's as simple as going out and picketing for a day, or we've seen a lot of celebrities bringing snacks out to the picketers, things like that. There's always something you can do. Write a letter to the production studios, whatever. But just support the writers. I think if you've got a show that you love, it's because writers worked hard on it. Yes, the actors worked hard. Yes, the directors worked hard, but there was a crew of people behind it writing it that made it happen. So give them some love. And with that, I don't have anything else. I hope you learned something about the writer strikes. This is the first kind of educational bit we've done on the episode. So I hope it kind of opens your eyes to the strike and what's going on and what the potential ups and downs of it will be. Be prepared for, if this thing lasts a while, for more reality television, for good or for bad. That's what we're going to get. Or stuff written by AI, which might be even worse. Or somebody coming out of the woodwork that's going to run for president in a decade and totally change the course of the country. You just never know. So, but with that, have a great week. We'll see what we've got going on next week. Hopefully we'll get, I know Andrew will be back. He was at a wedding this week for DJ Risky Business, who was on our show before. He's super cool. I'm super happy for him to be getting married. I wish he hadn't stolen Andrew on a Saturday, but that's how weddings work. And I think for the purposes of this show, that's probably more important than Andrew being here. So with that, I'll say have an awesome week. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time.